Hello again, vanilla gamers. Today we're going to talk about premading Arathi Basin. While Warsong Gulch has a big focus on individual classes making high-impact plays, Arathi Basin is much more teamfight based. It's a slower-paced, more methodical battleground, and there are a huge variety of ways you can approach it. First, we'll go over team composition, class roles, and base prioritization. Next, we will discuss positioning and rotations. And finally, we will talk about a few specific techniques that you can use to dominate the basin. Unfortunately, I don't have any AB premade gameplay footage, and there really isn't a server where quality premade versus premade AB games are happening right now. So for this video, I'll be using some footage from Silverstar. His premade on Nestorius were the main opponents I faced when I was ranking there, and the footage will be from a particularly close match we played against each other. A bit of my own gameplay from casual BGs will be mixed in as well. Let's get into it. Warsong Gulch has a very established meta, which we covered in detail in one of my earlier videos, but Arathi Basin is highly situational. The way you want to approach the basin heavily depends on how confident you are in the matchup. Your goal should be to 5-cap every game against PUGs, but if you're facing a tough game against a skilled enemy premade, you will want to approach things much differently. We'll go over both situations, but the focus will be on premade versus premade. Let's start with team composition. Like I said, AB is all about team fights, so stacking warriors is pretty crucial. I like to run with 3, but you need at least 2. Mages should be stacked as well due to their strong CC and peels, in addition to their ability to buy time for rotations with ice blocks. For some reason, the term spinning the flag is only common among American players, so for anyone who doesn't know, spinning the flag refers to interrupting enemies that are trying to cap. Hunters are another extremely valuable class in Arathi Basin. Their ability to create choke points, defend bases, and dominate combat in open space makes them one of the most impactful classes in this battleground. Warlocks are another strong teamfight class, but you only need 1 or 2 to get the job done if they are good players. Rogue's ability to ninja cap bases is unparalleled, but if you're facing a competent premade, they won't allow this to happen. If you respect the opposing team, you should probably only run with 1 rogue. But if the enemy team is sloppy or slow on rotations, rogues can take advantage of this to have a huge impact on the game by ninja capping. Running 4 healers is ideal. I recommend 2 priests and then 2 paladins or shamans depending on your faction. Remember, priests are the most versatile healers and dispellers in vanilla, so if you're missing a second paladin or shaman, you can usually get away with running triple priest. Druids bring very little value to Arathi Basin. They are the weakest healing class in teamfight situations, and they don't really have a spec that allows them to do significant damage. You should only bring 1 druid, and his main responsibility will be defending a base. Now let's look at the map. It's important to know that not all bases in AB are created equal. You need to prioritize certain bases for your team to be able to truly control the game. Even if you manage to 3-cap at the start of the match, if the 3 bases you have are spread out, it will be very difficult to hold them against a competent premade. The all-around best base on the map is Blacksmith due to its central location and the fact that it can only be approached by crossing a bridge or going through water. This makes it one of the easiest bases for setting up choke points and preventing enemy pushes from even getting near the flag. Lumbermill should be your second priority. It has excellent visibility, is fairly easy to defend, and provides you with the ability to slow fall down to Blacksmith. Keep in mind that priests and mages cannot cast Levitate and slow fall on other players in vanilla, so other classes will need Noggenfogger or an engineering parachute to slow fall. Your third priority should be stables or farm. Farm is slightly superior to stables because it's a bit easier to rotate to from LM and Blacksmith. Goldmine is by far the worst base. It has 0 visibility of the rest of the map and is extremely vulnerable to ninja caps. Goldmine usually ends up being a consolation prize for the team that fails to 3-cap at the beginning of the game. The optimal setup in a premade versus premade game is to hold Blacksmith, Lumbermill, and Farm. Often referred to as the Golden Triangle, this combination of bases provides you with the ability to have most of your raid float in the crossroads, easily rotating to whichever base needs help. Once a good team has the Golden Triangle locked down, it will be extremely difficult to cap a base on them. This means that in a premade versus premade game with evenly matched teams, the initial Blacksmith and Lumbermill fights are incredibly important. So, let's talk about team fighting. Like I've mentioned, Arathi Basin is more flexible than Warsong Gulch in terms of class roles. It's mostly about how well you team fight and how good your mages and hunters are at peeling groups of enemies and delaying incomings. Warriors are your team fight wrecking balls, and your shamans or paladins should stick with them. Priests are your most versatile healing and support class and should try to be present in every team fight. Mages and hunters should try to control the roads and create choke points to delay incomings. Keep in mind that rogues, warlocks, and druids are arguably the best classes for defending nodes. Hunters and mages also make good defenders, but they can usually have a bigger impact if they're allowed to roam around the map a bit. You have a fair amount of freedom in terms of which classes you send where at the beginning of the game. Just try to put yourself in a position to take Lumbermill quickly and then rotate into the blacksmith fight before the other team is able to tag it. Some people like to completely ignore Goldmine at the beginning of the game, but I like to send a rogue or druid solo. Their goal should be to delay the cap for as long as possible if the enemy team sends players to mine. The more players the enemy team sends to mine, the easier it should be for you to cap Lumbermill, which is your main priority besides blacksmith. Of course you need somebody to cap farm for horde or stables for alliance, but whether or not you leave a defender there at the beginning of the game is up to you. I recommend having whichever druid or rogue didn't go mine stay at farm or stables to defend in the early game. Blacksmith and Lumbermill will be where the first two meaningful team fights occur, and there are tons of different ways you can approach them. On the horde side, I recommend sending both a shaman and a priest to each node due to the offensive pressure that shamans provide, the insane kill potential that Wind Fury gives your warriors, and the fact that horde needs priests for defensive dispels. On the alliance side, I actually like to send both priests to Lumbermill and both paladins to blacksmith. If you tweak your setup around this tactic, you can steamroll the LM fight very quickly while the blacksmith team plays defensively with their paladins, surviving and spinning the flag. The Lumbermill team can then rotate or slow fall down to clean up the BS fight. This is an approach that I've found effective in the past, but putting a paladin and priest on each node is effective as well. Remember, there are tons of viable ways to approach Arathi Basin, and a lot of the meta revolves around your opponent's setup and what bases they prioritize. Some teams will basically go all in blacksmith at the start. You need to be ready to make adjustments. Regardless of how you choose to split up your healers, you should send multiple mages to Lumbermill along with some other offensive classes. This group's objective should be to push back the enemy team and cap LM as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, you should ideally have another hunter, warrior, healer team working on blacksmith. If you have the luxury of running 3 mages, you can send one to blacksmith, but make sure you have 2 going Lumbermill. If you find yourself falling behind in the BS fight before you've managed to cap LM, have one or both mages slow fall down to blacksmith.
OG is jumping down. OG is jumping down.
And again, all of this is highly flexible. You could easily find yourself needing more or less firepower at LM or BS depending on which base your opponent commits to more heavily. Just beware that losing BS in the early game will put you in an uphill battle, so your team should prioritize blacksmith above everything else at the start of the match. In situations where you are down a base and need to cap a node that is already controlled by the enemy team, the key to success is having a mage or hunter peel the graveyard when their res wave goes off. Try to time your kills and put all enemies on the same res timer. Keep in mind that you'll also need to fend off rotators, especially against a premade. Try to CC them and keep them out of range while your healers cap the flag and your mages and hunters peel the graveyard. If the opposing team achieves a 3 cap in the early game, it will be difficult for you to get back the advantage. If you're confident in your team fights and your mage's ability to peel the graveyards, you can try attacking blacksmith or Lumbermill straight up, but your chances of capping will be much better if you can create a distraction elsewhere on the map. One of the best ways to do this is by sending a rogue, druid, or even both to attempt a ninja cap. If your ninjas manage to tag one of the outer bases, or even just force a rotation by the enemy team, it will create a window of opportunity for you to attack blacksmith with a numbers advantage. Another useful tactic for breaking a 3 cap is to fake a blacksmith push. Have your raid head towards blacksmith on their mounts and make it look like you're committing to attacking it. If you see multiple enemies slow fall down from Lumbermill, turn around and quickly attack LM with a numbers advantage. These are a couple examples, but in the end there are lots of ways you can get creative with AB tactics. If you find your team struggling in the early game or losing the initial blacksmith and Lumbermill fights, try to use strategy, misdirection, and ninja caps to give yourself a numbers advantage in the mid and late game team fights, and put your mages on the graveyards when you're trying to cap a base. When it comes to 5-capping PUGs, it's mostly about trapping them near their spawn in the early game. Send a team of at least 2 or 3 players to ride through Goldmine, Blacksmith, and Lumbermill and report enemies to make sure you quickly cap those 3 bases. Use discombobulator rays to dismount anybody trying to be a hero. Assuming you don't meet much resistance, try to fast cap farm or stables before the enemy team manages to get the graveyard. If they do manage to get control of farm or stables, time your kills and put a mage on the graveyard just like we discussed earlier. Once you achieve a 5 cap, the game will end almost immediately. Just keep enemies contained and be aware of how many stealth classes you're dealing with. If one of your bases is getting overrun, it's extremely important to call out the res timer and have everyone spinning the flag. Save cooldowns like Ice Block and Bubble for these situations, and try to have your mages and paladins stagger them. Clutch cooldown usage and survival plays like this can buy time for your teammates to rotate or until the next res wave goes off. Stopping a node cap while your teammates are dead or out of position is probably the most impactful individual play you can make in the basin. Keep in mind that any class can do this with grenades, so make sure you have plenty of those in your bags. That's all for today, guys. Honestly, there are so many ways to approach Arathi Basin, it would be impossible to cover every viable strategy in one video. Remember, everything we talked about today is a lot more flexible and situational than what we went over in the Warsong Gulch video. Arathi Basin is almost always decided by big team fights, and those are less about what classes you have and more about everyone just doing their job. Let's get some discussion going in the comments about tactics, strategies, or setups that you guys have found useful for Arathi Basin, since there's such a multitude of ways to approach it. And remember, it's super important to have a good leader in Arathi Basin who can make adjustments and calls during the game. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more Classic WoW content just like this. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, hit me up on Twitter. I try to be as responsive as I can. And most importantly, go follow my Twitch channel, because I'll be streaming a ton once Classic is out. Thanks for watching, see you next time.